Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Hale Tufan. I'm a faculty member with the Cornell University Department of Global Development. And my talk today will focus on an approach we've tested to analyze gender and social difference to inform inclusive varietal design. The best part of talking to an audience at this Cultivating Equality conference is that I can delete the first 10 slides that I usually use to justify the importance of gender issues in agricultural research. Instead, I'll start with 2 points. First, this guy. Meet Mr. 50th percentile crash test dummy. He's responsible for female drivers being 73% more likely to sustain injury in car crashes in the US. He's the norm, the standard for crash simulations, and literally embodies that innovation is a gendered construct. So what? Well, fortunately, the point is coming across because sex and gender analysis are finally accepted to be central to good science. If it's published in Nature, it's good science. So in medicine, engineering, and design, the norms are shifting, which brings me to my second point. Gender shapes agricultural innovation, but agricultural research is lagging behind other fields. Crop variety design, for example, is not following best scientific practices by systematically including gender analysis. Instead, we have the 50th percentile crop variety, high-yielding, disease-resistant, nutritious, and climate-resilient. So the rest of my talk will focus on an approach we've tested to move away from this in cassava. So varietal design is currently seen as being a stage-gated process. This is a norm has been shifting globally in terms of crop improvement. And the first part of that process is product design. So understanding the biological and regional components, the value chain components, identifying a market segment, then describing an ideal product profile to match that market segment. But people like Vivi, who are chairing this session, and others are really pushing for changes to this and inserting the stiffer step around customer profiling. So how do you describe the social characteristics of the potential customers and include this in your crop varietal design? So for the Next Gen Cassava project, we've been taking this on and thinking, how can we develop actionable breeding targets that meet diversity and demand? This is a 3-part methodology. So we have the first part, which is very qualitative, and we're borrowing from the RTB Foods project here, where we employ what's called gendered food mapping. So really asking producers, processors, and consumers in very open-ended questions and methods to describe their ideal cassava variety and characteristics that they're looking for in those cassava varieties. Next, we use very quantitative methods such as a marketing tool called 1000 Minds and household demographic surveys such as ROMIS to really then look at a subset of these traits to ask who is preferring which of these traits by how much. So developing these typologies or trait preference profiles. And the last part of the methodology is bringing this back to the farm. So then working with the same farmers that they were collecting the typology information from to see on farm in their fields, what are they preferring? What are they choosing? What varieties are they making choices around? And how does this relate to the typologies that we think they will be choosing based on their expressed preferences? So the first part is around the typologies. And what we've done here in the bottom line is, as we know, social difference drives trait preferences. So this is a study that we're about to publish where we're not just looking at sex disaggregation of male or female, but each of these boxes is a trait ranking. So it's a heat map basically of how highly or lowly a trait is ranked across these different individuals. So we looked at sex disaggregation, but onto that we added the region where that person is living, and also the poverty level of their household, as well as the food insecurity or security level of the household. So what that helps us do is to be much more intentional about this customer profiling and start being able to say, a woman respondent in one area who's coming from a household that's food insecure has these trait preferences. So it's really adding a kind of an analytically an intersectional add-on to the usual work that we've done. And it's really showing that the sex of the respondent and their choices are exacerbated by the household food insecurity, for example, that those differences are becoming wider if the household is food insecure. So next, unsurprisingly perhaps, but again, we're showing this very empirically with on-farm varietal selection, that gender roles really drive varietal preferences. So this is using the TRICOT method again, and we have 36 different time points that we're collecting data around, going from kind of production traits to harvest, processing, and consumption. And across all of these traits, what we're seeing is women for cassava in Nigeria are highly involved in the processing and food quality aspects and sale of processed cassava goods, that you see this giant jump once the harvest and processing steps come in terms of how highly correlated their overall choice of varieties are with a time point for that trait. So again, we're really being carefully and really empirically showing breeders that these traits on this top half really, really matter, especially for women. So they should be paying due attention to them. And kind of the last exciting part of the research that we've been doing that we're working to write up is looking at how the value chain roles and gender together drive varietal preferences. What does that mean? We don't only look at the sex of the host farmer for these on-farm trials, but then we look at who they're actually handing over the harvested roots to. So in this case, for example, we have the sex of the farmer, if a woman, and if they're handing over to a man or a woman, and how that affects the ultimate varietal choices. And what we're seeing is it does matter. So not just the sex of the farmer, but who they're handing off to and the sex of that processor, as well as if that processor is themselves or someone else, does make a significant difference in the varietal choices they're making. Again, taking a deeper look at not just looking at male and female or sex disaggregation, but actually looking at what's happening along the value chain from production onwards. And we're also looking at methods. So without diving deep into each of these results, I'll briefly summarize this work. This is a cassava adoption study from Nigeria. We had data from husbands and wives within the same household ask the similar questions. So what we're seeing, for example, is there is significant disagreement between husbands and wives on who is managing cassava plots. Again, this is a message we're sending to breeders to say it really matters who you're talking to if you're asking questions about cassava, because there's fundamental disagreements. Not only that, but depending on how you ask a question around adoption, if it's ever planted an improved variety versus any plot currently has an improved variety, makes a difference on the response. So in one case, you may not see differences between husbands and wives, in the other you do. So these are all messages, again, going back to breeding programs for methodological innovation and being very careful in showing that empirically and making a case for those changes. So lastly, I just want to end by saying, I think as a breeding community, we need to re-examine our priorities. So we often really value the diversity of genetic resources, but we really don't value the diversity of farmers, consumers, and entrepreneurs, and even scientists in our teams. So I think it's really a time to have a paradigm shift and stop talking about integrating gender into breeding goals, but really thinking, how do the outcomes of crop improvement and plant breeding themselves contribute to gender equality goals? And with that, I'll thank you for attention. Thank you.